All those stay-at-home orders that were supposed to spare individual lives have taken an ironic turn, as the pandemic-induced economic collapse will now cause countless Americans to lose the very same homes they have been stuck in for months. With no signs of a recovery on its way, second waves of the pandemic rocking the country, and federal aid that is soon to expire, millions of people face dramatically and rapidly deteriorating financial circumstances. To give you an idea of just how precarious the situation is, consider this. According to data sourced by online rental platform Apartment List, nearly a third of U.S. households were unable to pay their July housing bills in full, a modest increase from statistics recorded in June. That means upwards of 28 million people will soon be in serious danger of eviction and homelessness if they can't find new income streams or if the government does not extend emergency aid measures. Of those that participated in Apartment List survey, only 13% could pay part of their rent or mortgage for the month, while 19% failed to make any housing payment at all. Renters were most affected, with 36% unable to pay, while the statistics for homeowners sat at around 30%. Studies have shown that renters are typically younger and therefore more likely to work in sectors that have been heavily affected by the pandemic, like restaurants, bars, and retail. And like we've seen in so many other instances, the pandemic is only worsening pre-existing problems. The Aspen Institute, an international non-profit think tank, found that even before the current unemployment crisis, 40% of renters in the United States were cost-burdened. Now, the number of Americans that are struggling to afford basics like monthly housing bills has been pushed to an all-time high. In this video, we're going to break down the latest data on the housing crisis that's poised to sweep the U.S. as federal aid expires and millions of Americans fall on some very hard times. We'll tell you who will be most affected, where the government has failed to act, and how this latest woe will exacerbate other side effects of the pandemic as well. As with many other elements of the pandemic, the most at-risk members for eviction are minority groups. Experts have said that Black and Latino households are at greater risk of losing their homes, and of course low-income individuals will be hit the hardest, as they often have little to no savings to rely on in catastrophic times like these. Unfortunately, many of these late, partial, or missed payments will not be just a one-time issue. Apartment List warned that delayed payments for 1 month more often than not will be followed by missed payments the next month, especially as economic conditions continue to deteriorate across the country. In support of this claim, research shows that 83% of households who paid their May housing costs on time and in full did the same in June. On the other hand, only 30% of households who were late on their May payments successfully handled their June bills. Without much significant recovery in the way of jobs or the economy at large, tens of millions of Americans have been dependent on unemployment benefits to get by. In a brutal perfect storm, unemployment benefits expire at the end of this month, along with other emergency measures like eviction moratoriums and forgiveness on late payments. As countless individuals and households lose their only form of income, what happens next will be a wave of evictions on a scale unlike anything the United States has seen before. In the last major financial disaster, the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009, approximately 10 million people lost their homes. Of course, that crisis played out over the course of several years. Now, that figure could reach 28 million people between now and September, in the span of just over a month. Emily Benfer, the chair of the American Bar Association's Task Force Committee on Eviction and co-creator of the COVID-19 Housing Policy Scorecard with the Eviction Lab at Princeton University, said that the number of people at risk of losing their homes in the weeks ahead is on a scale that is almost unimaginable. "We have never seen this extent of eviction in such a truncated amount of time in our history," she said. "We can expect this to increase dramatically in the coming weeks and months, especially as the limited support and intervention measures that are in place start to expire. Even the meager policies that are currently in place are leaving countless Americans out in the cold. Many of the eviction moratoriums did not come with any sort of financial assistance for struggling families, which means that the payments have simply built up in the backlog and will cause severe financial strain as soon as they have to be dealt with again. Furthermore, some states permitted landlords to continue receiving orders of eviction but did not allow them to be executed. Once the emergency protections expire, stockpiled eviction orders can be carried out immediately, instantly displacing families. Worst of all, 29 states don't even have protections in place that prevent evictions from happening. Once the federal government steps back, it'll be a free-for-all. Legal aid groups and housing advocates are awaiting a flood of new cases as these provisions run out. The call centers that connect people with social service providers have seen a 200% spike in call volume in recent weeks as families prepare for the devastation ahead. The scale of the evictions is unprecedented. Some states that have already lifted the moratoriums have seen this flood play out. In local courts in Memphis, Tennessee, for example, there was a backlog of 9,000 eviction cases. In many ways, the wave has already begun. We need to work to stop it from becoming a tsunami, and we're running out of time, said Diane Yentl, president of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. She continued, "We're seeing now a really, frankly horrifying confluence of increasing evictions in states where new cases are surging. And the system itself is already rigged against renters in a difficult position. A staggering 90% of tenants across the country do not have access to legal representation. In the midst of this crisis, as people are forced to choose between bare essentials like making rent payments or affording food for their families, they are more than likely unable to pay for internet access or phone service. Now that many evictions are being carried out online or over the phone to lower the risk and avoid packed courtrooms, it is difficult for low-income individuals to even dial in. In the case that they fail to appear, that results in a default judgment for the property owner. According to the COVID-19 Eviction Defense Project, CEDP, a coalition of economists and legal experts, 110 million Americans rent their homes, and 1/5 of those, representing over 20 million people, are at risk of eviction by the end of September. The plight doesn't just affect low-income households, but also plenty of middle-class families that simply didn't have the savings to weather such an unprecedented crisis. The shock of the virus pandemic and the ensuing economic collapse have caught millions off guard, even those that had high 5-figure or low 6-figure salaries prior to the crisis. Lost jobs, especially those that did not include severance pay, mean that formerly well-off individuals and families suddenly have no income streams other than federal aid. However, they have been forced to continue paying rent prices that aligned with their former incomes, creating serious financial strain. To make matters worse, this looming threat of a spike in homelessness comes at the same time that cases are surging across the country, particularly in the South and West. As states roll back reopening plans, more job losses will become permanent as the strain of extended store closures pushes many businesses over the brink. Housing advocates are demanding better protections on a state and national level. If eviction moratoriums were issued on a federal level, that would ease the pain somewhat. Other experts have called for financial assistance for renters, which would prevent both backlogged debts and take away some of the increasing pressure on property owners and landlords who rely on rent payments in order to stay afloat themselves. Rent strikes and tenants' unions are fast becoming the new normal. At one apartment complex in Denver, Colorado, tenants banded together and refused to pay, hoping to pressure the landlord into a new policy that would be more lenient on renters struggling to make ends meet. At this rate, researchers at Columbia University are anticipating an increase in homelessness of 40 to 45% year over year by the end of 2020. That means an additional 250,000 Americans would find themselves on the streets, pushing the total to 800,000. This comes at a particularly brutal time, as record heats have been recorded all across the country. A high-pressure heat dome is set to blast more than 80% of the United States, with temperatures exceeding 90 degrees Fahrenheit for the next couple of weeks. States from California to Alabama put alerts in place as they saw temperatures spike to 10 to 15 degrees above average. Moreover, a spike in homelessness could also worsen future waves of the pandemic. If millions of Americans do not have access to basic shelter and other necessities, spread becomes far more likely and virus pandemic cases will skyrocket once again.